Have you ever felt that no matter how much you earn, it seems like there is an invisible glass ceiling over your head? You work, you strive, but at the end of the month, the feeling is that you are just wiping ice. The truth hurts. The problem is not the economy, but the 7 signs of scarcity that are installed in your subconscious like a silent virus. Today, through the story of Elias, I will show you how your soul is programmed for lack while you pray for abundance. And if you do not subscribe to the channel now and continue with me, you will spend the rest of your life being a luxury slave, dying of fear of tomorrow. Elias grew up in an environment where success was viewed with suspicion. All his life he heard that money doesn't bring happiness, and that it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. Unconsciously, he associated prosperity with something dirty or spiritually dangerous. Every time Elias started to earn a little more, an invisible anxiety would take over him. He felt a strange urgency to get rid of that money, as if he were holding a hot coal. Psychology explains this as financial self-exclusion. Elias felt holy being poor, but felt like a traitor to his upbringing whenever his balance increased. Spiritually, Elias was under the yoke of a limiting religious belief that distorts the purpose of abundance. He did not understand that poverty is not a sign of holiness, but often a limitation to fulfilling one's purpose and helping others. The hidden hook here is that his mind saw money as a competitor to faith, not as a tool for expansion. To change this, Elias needed to understand that money is neutral and only amplifies what already exists in a man's heart. If you are a man of God and you are afraid of having a lot, you are saying that you do not trust the character the Creator formed in you. The confrontation here is direct and brutal. Elias used his humility to hide his fear of being great. He preferred the safety of scarcity, where he could blame the world rather than the responsibility of wealth, where he would have to master his resources. He realized that his soul was programmed for the almost, always stopping before the finish line so he would not have to face the unknown. Elias's mediocrity was like a wool blanket on a snowy day. It was comfortable, but it was preventing him from walking. He understood that until he made peace with the idea of being rich, prosperity would continue to flee from him as if he were a predator. Elias had the habit of always seeking the cheapest path, no matter the invisible cost of it. He did not buy what was best or what he truly needed. He bought what was on the discount tag, even if the quality was questionable. He believed he was being clever and saving, but in reality, he was reinforcing to his subconscious the message, "I am not worthy of what is good. I only deserve what is left over or what nobody wanted." Psychology calls this reactive scarcity mindset, where Elias would spend hours crossing the city to save 2 reais on gasoline, ignoring that his time, the most precious asset of a prosperous man, was being thrown away for an insignificant amount. The spiritual key here is understanding the law of value and planting. Whoever focuses only on the lowest price can never see the value of abundance, because they are always operating on the frequency of fear that the resource will run out. Elias was terrified that if he bought something first class, the money would disappear and there would be no replacement. He did not realize that by treating himself like a second-rate man, he emitted a vibration of lack that prevented the market and opportunities from treating him like an elite professional. To break this cycle, Elias had to learn that investing in quality is an act of faith in his own potential to generate more wealth tomorrow. Elias's confrontation was realizing that his search for bargains was a form of self-sabotage disguised as prudence. He accumulated cheap objects that broke quickly, generating more expenses and frustration in the long run, which kept his mind focused on fixing losses instead of building gains. He understood that true economy is not spending little, but investing well so that energy is not drained by mediocre things. Elias needed to start buying less, but buying better, signaling to the universe and to himself that he was finally ready to occupy the place of someone who enjoys the best life has to offer. Elias's closet was a monument to fear. He kept clothes that no longer fit, broken electronics, and even empty ice cream containers, just in case he might need them one day. This need to accumulate what has no usefulness was the physical symptom of a soul terrified by the possibility that the future might lack something. He could not let go of the old to make room for the new, because his brain was programmed to believe that what left would never return. Psychology explains that this compulsive hoarding is a desperate attempt by the ego to create a false sense of security, keeping Elias trapped in a survivalist identity rather than that of a conqueror. Spiritually, Elias was blocking the principle of the vacuum, which says that for something new to enter your life, the old must leave to open space. By holding on to what had already died, he was shouting to the Creator that he did not trust tomorrow's provision and that his only guarantee was that stored junk. The hidden hook here is that the energy of his home and his mind became stagnant, preventing new ideas and opportunities of abundance from finding a place to land. Elias needed to understand that prosperity is a flow, and whoever tries to dam it through accumulation ends up creating a swamp of mediocrity instead of a river of living waters. Elias's confrontation was painful when he realized that his safety stock was actually material proof of his lack of faith. He had to do a radical cleaning, donating what was sitting idle and throwing away what was useless, feeling each detachment like a small death of his fearful self. He discovered that abundance is not about what you retain out of fear, but about the courage to empty your hands so they are ready to receive something much greater. Elias understood that the stockpile of scarcity is the anchor that prevents the ship of his prosperity from leaving the harbor. By cutting the ropes of the past, he finally allowed the wind of abundance to begin blowing. Whenever Elias saw someone in a luxury car or posting a high-level achievement, his defense mechanism triggered instantly. He would quickly think or say phrases like, "He must be drowning in debt," "He surely stepped on someone to get there," or "It's easy to have that when you're born into a golden cradle." This bitter judgment was actually anesthesia for his own pain of being stagnant. Psychology calls this envy projection. By attacking the success of others, Elias tried to diminish the importance of what he himself desired, but did not have the courage to pursue. He did not realize that his hatred of other people's wealth was the padlock that locked his own bank account. The spiritual key here is the law of admiration and the seed. You will never have in your life what you criticize or curse, because your mind understands that success is something bad that must be avoided to preserve your moral integrity. Elias was trapping his own prosperity in a cycle of verbal curse. He did not understand that another person's success is living proof that the path exists and is available. The hidden hook is that by cursing the prosperous, Elias was closing the doors to learning from them, preferring to maintain his moral superiority of being the honest poor man while the world passed him by at high speed. Elias's confrontation was admitting that his judgment said much more about his internal frustration than about the character of those who succeeded. He had to consciously practice blessing the success of others, fighting the tightness in his chest every time he saw someone prosper. He understood that abundance is not a zero-sum game, where for one to win, another must lose. On the contrary, another person's success is a sign that the land is fertile. By replacing judgment with admiration, Elias began to change his own vibrational frequency, leaving the audience of critics to enter the arena of achievers. Elias's vocabulary was seasoned with constant complaints about the price of meat, the lack of opportunities, and the bad luck that seemed to chase him. He believed he was just being realistic, but psychology shows that habitual complaining atrophies the areas of the brain responsible for problem-solving and creativity. By focusing on what was wrong, Elias trained his mind to be an expert in difficulties, becoming unable to see the exits that were right in front of his nose. He was addicted to negative dopamine. He felt a morbid pleasure in sharing his pains with other mediocre people, creating a support network that only validated his stagnation. Spiritually, complaining is considered a prayer in reverse. The word reclaim means to call for something again. Every time Elias complained about scarcity, he was asking the universe to repeat that same reality. He ignored the power of active gratitude, which is the master key to opening the portals of abundance. The hidden hook here is that Elias's soul was in a state of blindness. Because he was so busy counting his problems, he had no eyes to count his seeds. He did not realize that murmuring in the desert is what makes the journey to the promised land last 40 years instead of 11 days. The turning point came when Elias was confronted with the fact that his words were drawing the map of his misery. He decided to do a fast from negative words, policing every sentence that came out of his mouth. The confrontation was brutal because he realized he almost had nothing to say if he could not complain. He had to learn to declare prosperity, even when the balance was low, not as a denial of reality, but as an affirmation of the authority. He had to change it. Elias discovered that by changing what he confessed, he began to change what he attracted, silencing the voice of scarcity to hear, for the first time, the voice of opportunity. Elias lived in an eternal wait for an external event that would change his luck. He waited for lottery numbers, for an unexpected inheritance, or for a politician who would finally fix the country's economy. He saw himself as a passenger in his own financial life, always ready to point the finger at the market or at his boss when things went wrong. Psychology calls this external locus of control, a mental trap where Elias handed the key to his destiny into the hands of others. By placing himself in the role of a victim of circumstances, he felt momentary relief for not being guilty, but paid the terrible price of being powerless to change his reality. The spiritual key here is the principle of stewardship and authority. The Creator delivered the earth so that man could dominate it, but Elias was being dominated by his bills because he was terrified of assuming the throne of his own story. He did not understand that prosperity is a fruit that grows on the tree of self-responsibility. No one would come to save him because he had already been given the tools to save himself. The hidden hook is that by fleeing responsibility, Elias also fled from his power. He preferred the comfortable mediocrity of someone who can't do anything, rather than the necessary discomfort of someone who decides to study, invest, and build wealth from zero. Elias's confrontation was the hardest of all. He had to look at his own bank statement and admit that every cent of lack was the exact reflection of his decisions, omissions, and excuses. He stopped asking for luck and began asking for wisdom to manage what was already in his hands. He understood that while he waited for an external savior, he would continue being a slave to chance. Elias decided that from that day forward he would be the only one responsible for his results, exchanging passive hope for relentless execution. He discovered that destiny is not something that happens to you, but something you create with the choices you make when no one is watching. The last and most destructive sign in Elias's life was his inability to be generous. He lived with closed hands, firmly believing that he did not have enough to help anyone. He saw the tithe, the offering, or even a simple act of helping someone as a loss, not as an investment in the cycle of life. Psychology explains that survival egoism keeps the individual in a constant state of alert, which blocks the prefrontal cortex and prevents long-term strategic vision. Elias was like the Dead Sea. It received water, but because it had no outlet, the water became salty, lifeless, and stagnant. He did not realize that the same closed hand that refused to give was the hand blocked from receiving. Spiritually, Elias was breaking the law of the cycle of generosity, which is the engine that keeps abundance moving in the universe. He ignored the principle that the seed that remains in the bag rots, while the seed that is thrown into the earth multiplies. The hidden hook here is that the lack of overflow was the final proof that Elias did not trust the source. He believed he was his own only provider, and that if he gave something, he would be left without. To change this, he had to perform a prophetic act of breaking scarcity, begin contributing and overflowing even when he felt fear. He needed to understand that prosperity is not about how much you accumulate in your basement, but about how much you allow to flow through your hands. Elias's final confrontation was realizing that his misery was not caused by what the world took from him, but by what he refused to give. When he began practicing overflow, he experienced an expansion of consciousness that destroyed the mentality of lack once and for all. He discovered that by blessing the lives of others, he activated a network of connections and opportunities that his selfishness would never allow him to see. Elias understood that being prosperous is being a channel, not a deposit. Scarcity died permanently in his soul when he realized that true wealth is not in what you retain out of fear, but in the authority of someone who knows there will always be more to sow and harvest. This story reveals that scarcity is not a negative number in the bank, but a virus that corrodes a man's vision. He only began to see the color of real money and the peace of prosperity when he had the courage to delete these 7 signs from his soul. And you? How many of these locks did you identify in your life while listening to this story? Recognition is the first step toward liberation, but only the confrontation with your own mediocrity can take you to the top. From today on, you no longer have the excuse of ignorance. You know where the leaks in your wealth are. The question is, will you continue being the Elias who keeps empty ice cream containers and complains about the government? Or will you assume the throne of your story and begin to overflow? Abundance is already available, but it requires that you abandon the frequency of lack in order to access the frequency of creation. If you decided that scarcity will no longer have a place in your house, write in the comments, "I renounce the Tiao, poor mentality." Subscribe to continue shielding your spirit and your mind against the virus of mediocrity. Remember, your financial future is the exact reflection of your inner health. Leave the desert and take possession of your promised land. See you in the next video.